50%. That's the wall Donald Trump just slammed down in front of India's economy, a barrier so steep it's not just blocking exports. It's suffocating them like the thick, polluted fog that blankets New Delhi. And unlike China, which can absorb a hit and strike back with equal force, India has no shield, no counterstrike, and no leverage. This isn't a fair fight, it's an economic mugging, and India walked into the alley wearing a sign that says, "Kick me." The timing couldn't be worse. India's growth had already been sliding for 6 straight quarters. Industrial output was sluggish, unemployment was climbing, and consumer demand was fragile. The Modi government has been bragging about resilient fundamentals, but fundamentals don't pay the bills when your biggest export market suddenly makes half your products unaffordable. The US takes in over 17% of India's total exports, about $85 billion worth last year. And with one move in August, Trump just put a sledgehammer to that pipeline. The sectors most exposed read like a hit list of India's economic pride. Textiles, the so-called engine of job creation, are finished. The US imports billions in Indian cotton garments annually. A 50% tariff wipes out their price advantage overnight, handing business to Bangladesh, Vietnam, and even parts of Africa. The factory towns of Tiruppur and Ludhiana aren't just going to slow down, they're going to hollow out. For 4 million garment workers, mostly women, the Modi government's Make in India dream is about to be replaced by a pink slip and a bus ticket home. Pharmaceuticals, the jewel in India's export crown, are next. Supplying nearly 40% of all generics in the US was supposed to be proof of India's industrial sophistication, but generics are low margin by nature, and the extra cost from tariffs obliterates what little profit remained. American buyers will pivot to alternative suppliers or push for brutal price cuts. Plants in Hyderabad and Gujarat will cut output. Layoffs will follow. The so-called pharmacy of the world will discover what happens when a market it depends on decides it doesn't need to depend on you anymore. Automotive components? Same story. India's $15 billion auto parts industry thrives on being just cheap enough to undercut Mexico and other suppliers. With tariffs, that edge evaporates. American factories won't think twice about switching suppliers. Supply chains can and do rewire themselves quickly when costs spike. And when they do, India won't just lose orders, it will lose the relationships and trust it took decades to build. Even IT hardware exports, the sector meant to prove India could be more than just a call center hub, are exposed. Servers, networking equipment, and components destined for Silicon Valley are now suddenly overpriced. The irony is suffocating. The same US tech giants outsourcing millions of hours of IT services to India will happily buy their hardware from Vietnam, Malaysia, or China instead. Agriculture is quietly taking a blow just as devastating. Processed foods, seafood, spices, all staples of India's rural export economy are now losing their place on US shelves. A shrimp farm in Andhra Pradesh, a spice mill in Kerala, gone from competitive to overpriced in a single policy change. For smallholder farmers and fishing cooperatives, this is not a trade war. It's an economic death sentence. And here's the brutal truth. India's vulnerability is self-inflicted. A strong economy, one with diversified export markets, deep domestic demand, and high-value manufacturing, can survive tariffs. China did it. When the US under Trump slapped tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars of Chinese goods in 2018, Beijing retaliated, found alternative markets, and doubled down on domestic consumption. China's economy bent, but it didn't break. India, on the other hand, built its growth story on low-value exports, a fragile rupee, and over-reliance on foreign markets it couldn't control. That's not resilience. That's begging for trouble. The macroeconomic fallout will be severe. Export revenues will nosedive, pushing GDP growth projections further down. The rupee, already bleeding from a widening trade deficit, will likely fall further, making imports of fuel, machinery, and even cooking oil more expensive. Inflation will rise, hitting the poor hardest. Foreign investors, seeing a storm with no safe harbor, will start pulling out capital. Stock markets will tumble. And unlike China, India can't rely on a massive state-controlled banking system to pump liquidity into the economy at will. The Reserve Bank of India is cornered. Cut rates to stimulate growth and the rupee sinks faster. Keep rates high to defend the currency and you choke already dying businesses. There is no good choice, only bad and worse. Politically, this is humiliating. Modi's government has spent years selling the idea that India is an emerging manufacturing superpower ready to challenge China. But this tariff shock reveals the truth. India is not in the same league. It's not even close. When Beijing faces tariffs, it negotiates from a position of strength, threatening counter-tariffs, leveraging its dominance in rare earth minerals, and reminding Washington that decoupling from China is a fantasy. India? It pleads for exemptions and talks about strategic partnership while watching factories close. The long-term damage could be irreversible. Once U.S. buyers shift their supply chains elsewhere, they won't return out of sentiment. Trade is cold-blooded. Cheaper suppliers win. And when the orders stop, the industrial ecosystems that supported them, tooling workshops, trucking fleets, port operators, begin to wither. These are not things you rebuild in a year or even 5. And there's one more layer to this collapse. India's own hypocrisy on the global stage. For years, New Delhi has played a double game in trade and foreign policy, selling itself as a trusted partner to the West while cutting backroom deals with its geopolitical rivals. It loudly proclaims solidarity with the US and Europe over shared democratic values, but quietly becomes one of the largest buyers of discounted Russian oil, propping up Moscow's war economy while claiming neutrality. This two-faced diplomacy worked for a while when the global economy was stable and India's market size gave it some charm. But now when the hammer falls, who comes to India's defense? Not the US, it just hit them with the harshest tariffs in decades, not Europe. They've been irritated by India's opportunistic trade stances and refusal to take a clear stand on major conflicts. Not China, its primary economic competitor, and a nation that India has antagonized in border disputes while failing to match its industrial power. The result is isolation. At the moment, India most needs allies. When China was targeted by tariffs under Trump, Beijing could mobilize relationships across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, using its Belt and Road network to redirect trade flows and secure alternative markets. It could leverage its dominance in rare earths and its vast consumer base to force Washington back to the table. India has none of that. No comparable industrial clout, no alternative buyers for its low-value exports, no strategic choke points in global supply chains to use as bargaining chips. Instead, India faces the reality of being expendable in global trade, a supplier of cheap goods that can be replaced, not a linchpin economy others depend on. Years of diplomatic chest-thumping about being a Vishwa guru, a global leader, crumble the moment tariffs reveal just how little real leverage exists. Modi's government can talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat all it wants, but self-reliance is meaningless when your biggest markets can destroy entire sectors of your economy with a single policy change. The tragedy for ordinary Indians is that they are paying the price for years of bad strategy at the top. A government obsessed with optics over structural reforms, with photo ops over industrial policy, with trade diplomacy built on opportunism instead of mutual dependence. The US, for all its aggressive self-interest, is at least consistent. It punishes competitors and rewards loyalty when it sees value. India, by trying to play both sides, has ended up pleasing no one and protecting nothing. So here we are, a 50% tariff wall, industries on life support, a currency under siege, an export base in free fall, and a government with no powerful friends, no retaliation plan, and no way to shield its people from the fallout. This is more than a trade dispute. It's a stress test of India's economic model, and the results are coming in fast. They're not just bad, they're catastrophic. If you found this video insightful, then please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.